Number 1. The Soviet S117. Picture a winter exercise in the Sea of Japan in December of 1952. The water is black and near freezing, and a small Soviet submarine is pushing toward her assigned position in the dark. She is a Stuka-class boat, an aging design from the 1930s, barely 58 meters long, with somewhere between 47 and 52 men crammed inside her hull. On paper, this is a routine peacetime drill. Nothing about it should be dangerous. And then her radio crackles with a problem. One of her diesel engines has failed. The message is calm and procedural. She reports the fault on a single shaft and states that she will continue toward the exercise area on her remaining power. That is the last thing anyone ever hears from her. There is no distress call. There is no follow-up. There is only silence. And silence in a submarine is the worst sound of all. Here is the quiet horror in that message. A boat running on one shaft handles differently. She turns slower, she answers the helm sluggishly, and when a submarine has to dive, that loss of control can be the difference between a clean descent and a plunge that never stops. Whatever happened next happened fast enough that no one had time to key the radio. The Soviet Pacific Fleet searched. They found no wreck, they found no debris, they found no bodies. An entire crew simply ceased to exist somewhere beneath a cold enclosed sea that is not even especially deep. And then the state did what the state did in 1952. It buried the story. Under the secrecy of the Stalin era, the loss was concealed for decades, and the families were told almost nothing. To this day, the cause is officially undetermined. Some believe she suffered a diving accident, unable to correct with one engine gone. Others suspect a collision, and many point to the mines. The Sea of Japan was mined during the Second World War, and a drifting mine does not care whose flag you fly. By 1952, the Stuka class was already old and mechanically fragile, a design pushing 20 years, and a boat like that in the depth of a Sea of Japan winter offered almost no margin for survival even if a man somehow reached the surface. She predates the famous Soviet nuclear losses that the West would later obsess over, boats like K-129, and yet she is barely known outside Russia precisely because the secrecy worked. Modern Russian naval historians still list her cause as unresolved. She was never found. So ask yourself, if a whole submarine can vanish in a shallow, enclosed sea in peacetime, what chance did the others have? Number 2. The Dutch Submarine O13. Move west now to the North Sea in the summer of 1940, and to the only Dutch submarine of the entire war whose fate is still a complete blank. She was an O-12 class boat with about 34 men aboard, and by this point in the war, her country no longer existed as a free nation. The Netherlands had fallen to Germany in May of 1940. Her navy kept fighting, but it fought from British harbors, exiles operating out of the Scottish port of Dundee. In June, she sailed from Dundee for a patrol in the North Sea, off the coasts of Norway and Denmark. She never came back. She sent no signal after departure. She left harbor and stepped off the edge of the map. There are two theories, and they could not be more different. The first is a mine. The North Sea in 1940 was one of the most heavily mined bodies of water on Earth, sown by both sides, and a submarine threading through it was gambling every hour. The second theory is darker and far more uncomfortable because it points inward. It is friendly fire. In the chaos of that summer, another Allied submarine may have mistaken O-13 for a German U-boat and attacked her. That idea is not idle speculation. The Polish submarine ORP Wilk reported ramming an unidentified submarine in the North Sea around that very time. Was that shadow in the dark O-13 cut down by a friend who never knew her name? No one can prove it, and no one can disprove it either. What makes it worse is that the sea will not help. The North Sea floor shifts with sand, and it is crowded with hundreds of wrecks from 2 world wars. No survey has ever conclusively identified O-13 among them. She is commemorated in the Netherlands as the Navy's single missing boat, a lone empty space on the roll. The Dutch Submarine Service had escaped to Britain when their homeland fell, carrying on the fight as exiles, and O-13 sailed with barely a few weeks between the collapse of her country and her own disappearance. Wreck hunting expeditions and survey teams have gone looking for her in the decades since, chasing candidate contacts on the seabed, and every time the case has stayed open. And she leaves us with a chilling lesson about war in 1940. Identifying a submarine at sea was so unreliable that a crew could be killed by their own side and simply logged as gone. Number 3. HMS Thistle. Some losses are tragic, this one is almost unbearably ironic. HMS Thistle was a British T-class submarine, a frontline boat about 84 meters long, commissioned in 1939 and sent into the storm of the Norwegian campaign in April of 1940. Off the coast near Skudenes, in the far southwest of Norway, she found a target. A German U-boat designated U-4 was operating in the same water. Thistle attacked. She fired at U-4 and she missed. The German boat survived and now it knew something crucial. There was a British submarine hunting in these waters. That knowledge was a death sentence, but not for the Germans. A few days later, the roles reversed. U-4, a small Type 2. A coastal U-boat commanded by Harold Durst caught Thistle on the surface at night and fired a spread of torpedoes. Thistle went down with every man aboard, roughly 53 officers and ratings. There were no survivors. The hunter had become the hunted inside a single week, killed by the very boat she had tried and failed to sink. Think about the size mismatch, too. U-4 was one of the smallest submarines Germany fielded, a modest coastal boat, and she had just destroyed a larger, more powerful British warship. In submarine combat, size and strength count for far less than who sees whom first and who shoots first in the dark. We know Thistle's fate largely because of German record-keeping. U-4's war diary documented the sinking, and after the war, that entry closed the case on what happened to the missing British boat. But knowing how she died is not the same as finding her. The waters off Skudenes are deep and swept by strong currents, and her wreck has never been confirmed by survey. She rests somewhere off the Norwegian coast, one of several British submarines swallowed by that brutal April. There's a tactical lesson buried in her loss, too. A surface attack at night was a favored U-boat method against enemy submarines, because a boat riding on the surface in the dark is nearly blind and desperately vulnerable, and Thistle's earlier failed attack had told U-4 exactly where to wait. She is remembered on the Royal Navy submarine memorials with the bleak notation that she was sunk by U-4. And she stands as a grim little parable of early war submarining. Miss your shot, and the sea may hand it right back to your enemy. Number 4. The USS Runner. Now cross to the Pacific, where the largest number of these vanished boats went missing, and meet an enemy you cannot see, cannot hear, and cannot fight. The USS Runner was a Godot-class fleet submarine, 95 meters of American steel, commissioned in 1942, with 78 men aboard. In May of 1943, she sailed from Midway for her third war patrol, bound for the frigid waters off the northern Kuril Islands and Hokkaido. She had earned her confidence. 2 earlier patrols had sent Japanese merchant ships to the bottom. She was a proven boat with a seasoned crew. And then July came, and she was simply overdue. Ordered home, she never arrived, and the Navy declared her presumed lost. Here is what makes Runner so haunting. When investigators went through Japanese wartime records after the war, they found nothing. No Japanese ship or aircraft claimed to have sunk a submarine in her area at that time. That absence is itself the clue. It points almost certainly to a mine. The Japanese ringed the northern approaches to their home islands with defensive minefields, and the Kuril region was among the coldest and most hazardous patrol areas of the entire Pacific War. A mine is the perfect murderer. It leaves no attacker to record the kill, no witness, no log entry, no triumphant radio message. It simply waits in the dark until a hull brushes against it, and then it erases 78 lives in an instant. Runner sent no distress signal. No wreck was ever found. She lies somewhere in the deep, cold, remote northern Pacific, one of roughly 52 American submarines lost in the Second World War, and one of the least likely ever to be located. The United States Submarine Force lists her among the boats that are, in their words, still on patrol. And she raises the question that shadows this entire list. How do you ever solve a sinking when there is no witness on either side? Number 5, the French submarine Protée. The next boat carried a secret, and that secret may be exactly why we cannot find her. Protée was a large French ocean-going submarine of the Redoutable class, about 92 meters long, with around 71 men aboard. By 1943, she was fighting for the Free French Naval Forces, operating out of a base in North Africa, and she was not doing ordinary work. She was running clandestine missions, slipping toward the occupied coast of France to land or supply secret agents. In December of 1943, she disappeared in the western Mediterranean, believed lost somewhere off the southern coast of France. And her covert role is the cruel twist in her story. A submarine on a secret mission does not broadcast its position. Its routing is deliberately obscured, its movements kept off the ordinary logs. So when Protée vanished, no one knew precisely where to look. The leading theory is a mine, because the western Mediterranean in 1943 was thick with them and heavily patrolled. A German anti-submarine attack is also possible. But the truth is that the very secrecy meant to protect her mission also erased the evidence of her death. Her boat wore the Cross of Lorraine, the symbol of the Free French, a mark of a navy rebuilding itself after the fractures of 1940 and 1942. In the years since, wreck surveys off the French coast have proposed candidate wrecks that might be her, but the identifications remained disputed, never quite certain. Her 71 men are commemorated at French naval memorials, remembered by a nation but not by a grave. The Redoutable class were among the most numerous of the large French submarines of the era, ocean-going boats built for long patrols, and Protée had a full pre-war career behind her before she ever joined the Allied cause. She belongs in the same haunted company as France's other lost boats, the Minerve and the Eurydice, even though those tragedies came from a later age of submarining. And she teaches a bitter lesson that runs through the history of covert warfare. The silence that keeps a mission alive can also swallow the men who carried it out. Number 6. The USS Kete. Some of these boats offer no answer at all. They offer 3 and force you to choose between them with no way to know. The USS Kete was a Bali-class fleet submarine, 95 meters long, with 87 men aboard, patrolling the East China Sea near the Ryukyu Islands in the early spring of 1945. She had just finished a good stretch of work sinking several Japanese vessels. On the 20th of March 1945, she transmitted a routine weather report. Ordinary, procedural, unremarkable. She was then ordered to head toward Midway. She never arrived, and that weather report was the last anyone ever heard from her. Now consider the 3 doors, because historians genuinely cannot decide which one she walked through. Behind the first door is a mine, the same silent killer that claimed Runner. Behind the second is the Japanese submarine RO-41, which was operating in the area and may have caught her. And behind the third is the weather itself. The East China Sea in late March of 1945 was racked by severe storms, and a submarine on the surface in a violent sea can be lost with no enemy involved at all. Japanese records, when examined after the war, did not cleanly resolve which fate was hers. All 3 remain equally plausible, which is what makes Kete one of the most genuinely ambiguous losses of the entire war. She sent no distress call. No wreck was ever found. And the build-up to the Okinawa campaign was crowding those same waters with activity, thickening the fog of the record even further. The Palau-class boats like Kete were among the finest submarines America built in the war, deep-diving and capable, which makes it stranger still that she could simply evaporate this late in the fighting, at a point when the United States dominated the Pacific. There is something almost unbearable in the shape of her ending. A crew of 87 men, on the cusp of turning for home, sends a note about the weather, and then vanishes into 3 possibilities that will never be narrowed to one. She too is still on patrol. Number 7. The USS Cisco. If you want to understand how thin the margin was, look at the boat that died on her very first patrol. The USS Cisco was a Palau-class submarine commissioned in 1943 with 76 men aboard. In September of that year, she sailed from Port Darwin, Australia, into the Sulu Sea, southwest of the Philippines, on her opening war patrol. Within days, she was gone. It was one of the shortest careers of any American submarine in the war. And the reason is a detail that should send a chill through anyone who has ever ignored a warning light. Cisco sailed with a known mechanical problem, trouble in her hydraulic or oil system. Her commander had actually requested more time to have it repaired before departure. He was overruled by the schedule. The boat went to war broken. That fault killed her. The defect left an oil trail on the surface, a shining ribbon pointing straight down at the submerged submarine. Japanese aircraft and surface craft spotted it, and they attacked. They bombed and depth-charged the position, and Japanese forces claimed a submarine kill. After the war, that attack report was matched to Cisco's disappearance. There were no survivors. No wreck has ever been conclusively surveyed and identified. 76 men went to the bottom of a shallow, well-patrolled sea because a repair was rushed and a fault they knew about betrayed them from the moment they submerged. Cisco is the purest example on this list of the war's unforgiving arithmetic. A single unrepaired flaw, a single oil slick, and a brand new boat with a full crew was erased before it had even proven itself. Her commander's plea for more time is one of the most quietly devastating footnotes in submarine history. And she asks a question every engineer dreads. How small can a fault be and still be fatal? Number 8. The USS Capelin. Cisco's story has a near twin, a boat that also carried its defects into the deep and paid the same price. The USS Capelin was another Balao-class submarine of 1943 with 78 men aboard. Late that year, she vanished off the coast of Celebes, in the Netherlands, East Indies, on her second war patrol. She was declared lost in December of 1943. Capelin was not a healthy boat. She had reported mechanical defects, including a faulty conning tower hatch. A genuinely dangerous problem for a vessel whose survival depends on sealing perfectly against the sea. She had sailed from Darwin into the Molucca and Celebes seas, some of the most treacherous water in the theater, shallow, reef-strewn, and sown with mines. And her fate splits three ways, just like Kete's. It may have been a mine. It may have been a Japanese anti-submarine attack. Or it may have been a diving accident, that faulty hatch failing at depth with no enemy anywhere near. Japanese records show possible anti-submarine actions in the region, but none that definitively match her. One of the last traces of Capelin is a report from another American submarine that may have sighted her during the patrol, a final glimpse before she disappeared for good. She sent no distress call. No wreck was ever found. Her 78 men joined the grim tally of 1943, the deadliest stretch for the Pacific submarine force. What lingers about Capelin is the compounding of risk. Take a boat with a known, hull-threatening defect and send it into shallow, mined, reef-choked water, and the causes of death begin to blur together. Was it the enemy, or was it the flaw she carried with her? The sea kept that answer, and it has never given it back. Number 9. The USS Grampus. Not every boat died to an invisible enemy. Some were hunted down in the open in some of the most violent water of the entire war. The USS Grampus was a Tambor-class fleet submarine, about 93 meters long, commissioned in 1941, with 71 men aboard. In March of 1943, she was lost in or near Blackett Strait and Vela Gulf, in the Solomon Islands, during the ferocious night naval battles raging across that archipelago. The Solomons were a meat grinder. American submarines were thrown against the Japanese supply runs that the sailors nicknamed the Tokyo Express, and the narrow passages between the islands were swept by destroyers and lit by gun flashes. Almost every night, Grampus was in the middle of it. The likely cause of her loss is an attack by Japanese destroyers, possibly the warships Minagumo and Murasami, during a night action. But even here the record is not clean. She may instead have struck a mine, or suffered a diving accident in the confined, current-tricky waters of the strait. The exact position where she went down is uncertain, and that uncertainty has defeated every attempt to find her. She lies near Iron Bottom Sound, that stretch of Solomon Islands water so choked with sunken ships from the 1942 campaigns that it earned its grim name. Somewhere in or around that crowded graveyard, Grampus and her 71 men rest unfound. There were no survivors, and no wreck has been definitively located and identified. Grampus had a solid early war record before that final patrol, which makes her disappearance into the chaos all the more stark. She shows what happened when submarines were committed to narrow island passages against a determined enemy. The Tambor-class boats were capable submarines, but they were aging by 1943 standards, and the reconstruction of Grampus's final hours was pieced together only after the war from Japanese destroyer movements that night. A probable story rather than a certain one. The confined water that let them ambush the Tokyo Express also turned them into targets, boxed in and hunted in the dark. Number 10. The USS Albacore. The next boat achieved something so significant that it changed the course of a major battle and then died in the most impersonal way imaginable. The USS Albacore was a Gato-class fleet submarine, commissioned in 1942 with 85 men aboard. Her name belongs in the front rank of the war because in June of 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, she fired a single torpedo that struck the brand new Japanese aircraft carrier Taiho. That one hit was catastrophic. The damage ruptured fuel systems, and hours later, a buildup of volatile fuel vapor tore the great carrier apart in a series of explosions that sent her to the bottom. One torpedo from one submarine had helped destroy one of the most powerful warships in the Japanese fleet on the day of its first real battle. Albacore was one of the highest-scoring American submarines of the war. And then, in November of 1944, on her 11th war patrol, she went to the northern waters off Hokkaido. And there her story ended in silence and iron. She struck a mine in a Japanese defensive minefield. A Japanese patrol boat actually witnessed it, reporting that a submarine had hit a mine and gone down amid heavy oil and debris. After the war, that sighting was matched to Albacore's disappearance. There were no survivors. No wreck has been surveyed and recovered from those deep, cold northern waters. Consider the terrible contrast at the heart of her story. This was a boat that had outfought a fleet carrier, a boat of skill and daring and consequence. And she was killed not by a worthy opponent, but by a passive lump of explosive anchored in the dark. A weapon with no eyes and no intent. Her 85 men are still on patrol. And she proves that, in this war, brilliance at arms bought you no protection at all against a mine that simply waited. Number 11. The USS Trigger. If reputation could save a submarine, this boat would have come home. The USS Trigger was a Gato-class fleet submarine commissioned in 1942, and she was a legend, one of the most decorated American submarines of the entire war, laden with battle stars and unit commendations, credited with sending a great tonnage of Japanese shipping to the bottom across patrol after patrol. 89 men crewed her. In March of 1945, she was operating near the Nansei Shoto, the island chain in the East China Sea, in the same weeks in the same waters where the USS Kete had just vanished. Trigger was part of a coordinated group, a wolf pack of American submarines. And then her packmates lost contact with her. They tried to raise her by radio and could not. What happened to Trigger is better documented than most on this list, and it is grim. Japanese records describe a prolonged, coordinated anti-submarine attack, aircraft and surface escorts working together, hammering a submarine inner area with depth charges. The intensity reflected the pressure of the moment because the Okinawa campaign was building and the Japanese were fighting with everything they had. After the war, that documented attack was attributed to Trigger's loss. There were no survivors. No wreck has ever been located and identified in the East China Sea. One of the great boats of the war, a submarine whose name was spoken with respect, was pinned down and destroyed, and then she was simply gone. Trigger delivers perhaps the hardest truth in this entire story. Skill did not save these crews. Experience did not save them. A towering combat record did not save them. When the enemy concentrated aircraft and escorts over a single submarine, even a legend could be driven under and never seen again. Her 89 men joined the roll of the still missing, remembered as one of the finest boats the force ever lost. Number 12. The USS Bullhead. And so we come to the last of them in every sense. The USS Bullhead was a Balao-class fleet submarine commissioned in 1944 with 84 men aboard, and she holds a somber distinction. She was the last American submarine lost in the Second World War. Her end came on the 6th of August, 1945, in the Lombok Strait off the island of Bali on her third war patrol. She was sunk by a Japanese Army aircraft that dived on her and dropped bombs, scoring direct hits. The pilot reported the strikes and an oil slick and debris rising to the surface. There were no survivors, and no wreck has ever been conclusively located. Hold that date in your mind for a moment. The 6th of August, 1945 is also the day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. On the same day, the world crossed into a new and terrible age. A submarine full of young men went to the bottom of a narrow tropical strait, unnoticed against the enormity of the news. Japan would surrender within days. Bullhead missed the end of the war by the thinnest of margins. She had operated in the Java Sea and the surrounding waters of the East Indies, threading the narrow, well-patrolled passage between Bali and Lombok. There's even a human footnote that makes her loss ache a little more. A war correspondent named Martin Sheridan had sailed aboard an earlier Bullhead patrol, close enough to touch a crew that would not survive the next one. Bullhead is the final entry on the American Submarine Force's roll of wartime losses, the last name on a long and sorrowful list. A Balao-class boat like Bullhead was deep-diving and tough, built to take punishment, but no submarine on the surface can shrug off a direct bomb hit from an aircraft that has already found her, and she carries the plainest lesson of all. The danger did not ease as victory approached. It reached out and took 84 men in the war's very last hours, and then closed over them without a trace. Step back now and look at all the 12 together, because a pattern emerges, and it is unsettling in its consistency. Again and again, the story has the same shape. A boat departs on a routine patrol or a covert mission. She sends one last ordinary message, a weather report, a note about a broken engine, or nothing at all. And then there is silence, and no attacker ever logs a certain kill. The single most common executioner in these stories is the mine. It almost certainly took Runner in the north, and Albacore off Hokkaido, and very likely Protée in the Mediterranean, and it hangs over the losses of the Soviet S117 and the Dutch O13. The mine is the perfect agent of disappearance because it leaves no witness. There is no ship to claim the victory, no pilot to file a report, only a hull that never surfaced. Then there are the boats we can name a killer for. Thistle was sunk by U-4. Trigger was crushed by a coordinated air and surface attack. Cisco was betrayed by her own oil slick and bombed. Bullhead was hit from the air on the last day. For these, we know the how, even when we cannot find the where. And between those two groups sit the truly ambiguous cases, the boats with 3 possible endings and no way to choose. Kete, with her mine, her enemy submarine, and her storm. Capelin, with her mine, her attacker, and her failing hatch. Grampus, hunted in the dark but perhaps lost to a mine instead. These are the ones that refuse to resolve. Notice too how often a mechanical flaw sits at the center of the story. Cisco's oil leak, Capelin's faulty hatch, the S117's dead engine. In a machine designed to sink on purpose and then come back. A single broken part is not an inconvenience, it is a loaded weapon. The common thread across all of it is the absence of a witness, and it is that absence, more than the water itself, that defines the mystery. So why, in an age when we have mapped so much of the ocean floor, are these boats still lost? The answer is a stack of obstacles, each one enough on its own to hide a submarine forever. First, there is depth and cold. Runner and Albacore lie in the deep, frigid waters of the northern Pacific. Kete and Trigger rest in the East China Sea. These are not shallow, sheltered spots you can survey on a calm afternoon. Second, there is the problem of company. O13 vanished into the North Sea, a floor already crowded with hundreds of wrecks and constantly reshaped by shifting sand, so that even a real wreck is nearly impossible to single out. Grampus lies near Iron Bottom Sound, itself a graveyard of ships. Third, and most cruelly, there is the problem of position. A submarine on a covert run like Protée, or one limping on a single shaft like the S117, does not leave a precise last known location. The very circumstances of the loss smear the search area across dozens of square miles of hostile, mined, current-swept sea. Add to that the simple fact that after the war, salvaging a lost submarine in deep water was rarely a priority, and you have boats that were, in effect, written off as unreachable. There is one more obstacle, and it is human rather than physical. To search for a wreck, you first need a place to point the sonar, and for boats lost with no witness, there is often no reliable starting point at all, only a wide box on a chart where a submarine was supposed to be. Runner's box sits in cold water off the Kuriles. Bullhead's lies in a narrow strait off Bali. Searching every square mile of those areas at depth would cost a fortune, and yield, most likely, nothing. Modern sonar and deep-water robotics have occasionally reopened these cold cases, and now and then, a long-lost submarine is finally found and identified. But for the 12 in this story, the sea has kept its silence. The terrain that killed them is the same terrain that hides them. There is a phrase the United States Submarine Force uses for boats like these. They are not called lost, or sunk, or destroyed. They are said to be still on patrol. It is a way of holding a crew in the present tense, of refusing to close the door entirely on men who were never brought home. Every navy in this story has its own version of that grace. The Netherlands remembers O13 as its single missing boat, a permanent empty berth in the fleet's memory. France honors Protée at its naval memorials, and Britain marks Thistle among the submarines that never returned from Norway. Each of these is a way of grieving without a grave, of naming men whose resting place the sea will not reveal. Think about what that means for the families. There was no body to bury, no wreck to visit, no final position to grieve over. There was only a date, a name, and a silence. And yet the names endure, carved into memorials and read aloud at ceremonies, precisely because the ocean gave nothing else back. That, in the end, is why these vanished boats still pull at us. It is not only the mystery of how they died, or the tantalizing chance that sonar might one day find them. It is that each one carried dozens of living men into the dark and then closed over them completely, leaving the rest of us with an unfinished sentence. 12 boats from a Soviet coastal submarine in a winter exercise to the last American boat lost before the guns fell silent, spread across the North Sea and the Mediterranean, the Solomons and the Kurils, the Sulu and East China Seas. Different flags, different years, and different enemies, and yet in the end, almost exactly the same ending every single time. One last ordinary moment and then nothing. 12 submarines went down and were never recovered. Their crews are, in the truest and gentlest sense, still on patrol. And somewhere beneath the cold water, they are waiting to be found.